Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. My name is Tanika Mehra, and I am your host for today. We have a very special guest with us, Atin Sanyal, the founder and CTO of Galileo. Atin has had an illustrious career with over a decade of AI and ML experience, playing pivotal roles in companies like Apple and Uber before founding Galileo. I'm beyond excited to have him here today with us to share his incredible experiences and insights from his fascinating journey. Welcome, Atin.
Oh, thank you, Tanika. I'm very excited to be here and very excited to be chatting with you. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for joining. Could you start by telling us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. So I grew up in India, in New Delhi, and I am the son of two doctors. So there were a lot of books on science and medicine around me while I grew up. And I think that piqued my interest in doing something in the R&D space. And eventually, I ended up coming to the States in 2011, and I was doing my research master's at UCLA. And I still remember the day. It was October 4th, 2011, when Siri was launched. And I remember seeing the keynote, and I was just blown away by the fact that you could ask a phone, hey, do I need an umbrella or not? And it would give you the weather report. So just blown away by that. At that time, I was working on completely different things. I was doing optimization algorithms or on routing algorithms on navigational systems like Google Maps and back in the day, TomTom. That was very interesting to me. But that one moment when I saw that you could talk to your phone in natural language, it inspired me to reach out to the founders of Siri. And it was a bit of a long shot, not expecting a response. But I immediately heard back, and one thing led to another. And for the last 13 years, I've just been in that field since.
Wow, that's incredible. And you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I'm so glad you took that shot. So could you talk a little bit more about what next? Like, what was the journey bit from that to actually founding and starting Galileo? And maybe share a little more about what Galileo does as well.
To start with the last part of your question, Galileo is a generative AI platform that helps you build Gen AI apps in a safe and trustworthy way. What that means is there's a lot of potential in these language models, and people are building a lot of very powerful applications. But at the end of the day, these models are dream machines, and there's a way to control them and tune them. And often they tend to say the wrong things, like hallucinations, a very big problem. And that can drive your business down if you're using these LLMs for business critical applications. And then there's the whole story around auditability and compliance, which is also taking shape as this industry grows. So we help sort of really shine the light on detecting errors these models make, and we build algorithms that would automatically detect these issues. And to get into how I started this company, I think I can divide my career till now into essentially two phases. I think one is first 5 years I spent in the pre-machine learning NLP days, where natural language was mostly driven through these knowledge graphs that would load in memory. And of course, they were much less powerful compared to some of these models that we deal with today. But at least that taught me the fundamentals of how you can build a natural language system. And the more interesting part, I think, of my career came in the second half when I was leading teams at Uber and building out their end to end machine learning platform. And that one team really was driving all of the AI traffic for Uber. So that means serving hundreds, if not thousands, of models across a span of different use cases, all the way from predicting ETAs to food recommendations and how safe a ride would be. So very business critical, very critical models where the room for getting it wrong is the penalty that you can pay is very, very high. So one of my realizations from my many years there was that evaluation tooling for machine learning was just fundamentally broken. And that would lead to a lot of the issues that we also saw at Uber as well as Apple. And I realized that there's a way that you can more scientifically shine a light on the errors and evaluate models in a better way. And a lot of it comes down to the data. So that's what inspired me to start the company. And for the first couple of years of our existence, we were dealing with three large language model NLP models, which were mostly like smaller BERT models or entity detection models. But it would essentially hook into your models and determine a lot of errors using math and statistics. And it would really shine a light on the data. And if you fix the data, it really fixes your model. That was the underlying philosophy. Eventually, in 2023, the whole world was taken up by the whole NLP fever or LLM fever, if you will. And from there, I think the interesting journey has been figuring out what the new workflows are, how people are building applications in the LLM era. And the good news for us is that the underlying issues are still the same. It's just garbage in, garbage out. And can we build better ways to almost algorithmically and in an automated fashion detect errors in your data that's dragging your LLM's output down? So that hopefully gives you a good summary of why I started this company and what we do.
Yeah, no, that's incredible to hear. What a fascinating journey. And it sounds very exciting that you've been in super high impact, fast paced environment. Could you share a little bit more about how you think about like building and leading engineering teams specifically in these high stakes environments like at Uber and at Galileo today?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I tend to often look back at some of my mentors that have come across my way in my career. And there's a couple of folks who have taught me a lot. And one of the folks, he's a good friend of mine. His name is Vineet Khosla. He's the CTO of the Washington Post. And I worked with him for many years. And one thing he taught me was how to create a culture of excellence. So I've been obsessed with almost creating this excellence handbook. And I carry that handbook with me everywhere so that I don't forget how to build an excellent culture. And till now, I think I've sort of boiled down a culture of excellence to four things. Number one is hiring well. You can't do anything alone. You need great people around you. So, how do you sell a vision and how do you build a vision and inspire the best people on earth to join you? Number two is having clear ownership. Because if you get the best people and they're playing football in a field with no goals, that's not going to lead you to success. The third is creating boundaries where you're not essentially not causing issues where people in an unhealthy manner to step on each other. And the fourth and the most important one, I think the first three are more obvious. The fourth one, which I've learned along the way, is really not fearing the unknown. It's often hard to do that on a day to day because you tend to try to build frameworks towards efficient execution, which is almost counterintuitive to being not afraid of the unknown. But having that lack of fear on a day to day to be able to be like, here's a unknown problem and I'm going to chase it and I might fail, but there's I probably discover five ways to fail and then the sixth method might show some light. I think that's very important to have just as a culture in the company because that in the long run to succeed, I think you'll always have to innovate and try to be ahead of the curve because if you're chasing something that's worth solving, others will come and try to solve the same problem, which is the good thing. But then how do you stay ahead of the curve is by innovating and chartering the unknown. So remembering to always not fear the unknown and try to always take the deterministic path is probably one of the most important lessons I've learned.
Wow, that's so fascinating. And I'm sure you're totally fearless. You're starting your own company. So entrepreneurship is really interesting journey where you have known unknowns and then unknown unknowns, which I'm sure just keep coming your way. And it's great to see that you guys are choosing the deterministic path and experimenting and trying your best. I think that's all that can be done.
I think the topic of unknown unknowns, what I've seen is the best people who end up being linchpins in your company or just great people you work with, they thrive in working on hard problems which have not been solved. It's almost just innate to a very, very highly ambitious person who's trying to really have impact. They know that at some point they'll have to solve for the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
So creating that environment where you make it okay on a day to day to be, here's a bunch of unknown unknowns and we're going to solve it today and we're going to solve it tomorrow. I think that culture is one where great people thrive for a long run. Because otherwise, if you're running a mediocre shop and you accidentally hire great people, it'll take them a few months to realize that this is not the place for them and they would leave.
That's fair. I mean, thank you for sharing your playbook for excellence. It was a very fascinating concept and glad that you're chartering it forward. Another interesting philosophy that you advocate for is that one size fits some principle, specifically when you're evaluating Gen AI systems. Could you provide more insight on how businesses can use that more effectively to their own AI projects or their own philosophies as well?
In my career, I have seen two inflection points in Silicon Valley. One was the mobile and cloud revolution, which happened in the early 2010s. And now we're seeing the AI wave. So, one thing I noticed, especially in the first wave, was whenever I spoke to people who would use kind of all or nothing sort of statements or overgeneralization statements like
Yeah.
there's one way to do this, or this won't happen, or that will happen. More often than not, they're often wrong. I'm seeing the same trends in the AI wave where there's a lot of these like all or nothing sort of statements made. And in context of evaluating Gen AI systems, one of those statements is that there's just one model that you can build or one method to evaluate any kind of errors. And you just need one system that can find all kinds of hallucinations. And that's a typical mindset that I've seen some people have. What we've realized, though, in working with many Fortune 500 customers is the one size fits some principle, which I've come up with. And that basically states that there's a certain level of efficacy that you can get from a generalized method, but the last mile or the last 20% you can only get through custom fine-tuned instructions or fine-tuned data that is so endemic to you and so idiosyncratic to you, if you will, that there's no way that a generic system can solve it. Like one of our customers, they're one of the largest telcos in the world. They essentially were able to achieve about 82% accuracy in detecting hallucinations in their Gen AI system. But they took that to 98% by supplying certain fine tuned instructions to our system. So when we're building any system, it's important to keep this one size fits some principle in mind so that you don't have to build something that's aiming for solving all the world's problems. You build something generic enough that solves the baseline, and then from there you kind of go in a customized manner.
That's fair enough. That's a good, interesting concept, and I'm sure it's pretty applicable to some of your larger customers who have very specific needs. So, speaking of your larger customers, could you share some promising future applications of Gen AI that you're particularly excited about within Fortune 500 companies, maybe?
Absolutely. I think one privilege that we've had as Galileo is that we are a horizontal tool. So we have worked with customers in telecommunications all the way to consumer goods and every industry in between, from agriculture to I can't even go through the whole list. It's very interesting to see and connect the dots across the challenges people face across different industries. I'm personally most excited about two industries in particular. One is healthcare, and the other is any general sort of voice recognition system, which we've all gotten used to using, but I'm sure 100 out of 100 people are pretty frustrated by that automated bot that tells us to dial 2 for something and then eventually gets it wrong. And we're like, just get us the sales rep immediately. So I'm very excited about LLMs being able to up level those simply because I think it ties to the original hypothesis when I started the company with my co founder. We said that unstructured data is 90% of the world's data, just lying dormant in warehouses in the form of documents and handwritten notes and PDFs. And there's so much potential for machine learning to take those. And when we started the company, less than 10% of people were actually doing any kind of ML or AI on unstructured data. So we saw that as the next sort of wave. Although, I mean, we didn't predict the specifics of GPT and OpenAI doing this, but I think we kind of nailed this general trend that we're seeing around now we're taking language and making sense of it. That has basically put AI on the center stage now. Because before that, there was AI going on, like Amazon and Google, everyone's been doing AI, but more as a secondary enabler technology. It's the first time in history that AI is ripe to become the product itself. And we started the company knowing that unstructured data will be at the helm of a lot of these problems. So in healthcare, for example, there's so much just data in lying in all kinds of formats, whether it's insurance data or doctors' handwritten notes or drug discovery data just lying in the form of PDFs, and it's insane. So this industry is ripe to be completely up-leveled through not just LLMs, but also the future, which includes multimodality. So I'm very excited about that in particular. And because healthcare is such a basic need for human beings, I think it's one of those industries where, of course, I might be biased. I come from a family of two doctors. I'll always choose healthcare over any other industry.
Uh-huh. I mean, if you see the two industries that you're most excited about are customer support, which people spend hours like on phones, like trying to get through and solve their own problems. And two is like healthcare. I feel like that's great to hear. And hopefully that they get digitized soon in like a very responsible manner so that they're solving people's problems. But what would you say are like the biggest challenges you think in adoption of AI in these large enterprises, and how do you think they can be addressed?
I think the challenge is something that's existed in AI for a while, which is the challenge of how to better explain and have these systems be more transparent. Machine learning models have typically always been looked upon as black boxes, but the challenge is even it's harder now given how complex these models are and how on one hand these super powerful machines are at your fingertips, and on the other side the bar has been lowered for anyone trying to adopt AI. You don't even need to know code to build an AI application, which is the first time that's happening in history. The challenge now is how to build more transparency and explainability into these systems so that you understand better why the model is saying something it's saying, and then accordingly set up systemic guardrails so that you can avoid things like biases in these models, which are a function of biases in the data that the models were trained on. How do you guardrail against such biases? And then when you train these models from scratch, you're essentially training it on the data from the world. And we are the ones who are generating the data on the internet as we are using the internet, and we are humans. So our biases tend to kick in into these systems, and there's a lot of noise in the data which these models get trained on. So how can you curb that in the first place? Can you train these models on higher quality, unbiased data? The availability of biased or unbiased data is also another challenge where you just don't have enough information about a certain category, which would lead you to a more unbiased model. So there's all these challenges at different parts of the spectrum where as a user, you want to build your GenAI system in a more compliant way. And as a provider of these services, you want to train these models in a more responsible way so that these inherent biases are avoided. I think that kind of summarizes the set of challenges. And I think it also points to why we started building Galileo in the first place, which is we originally started off as a fine tuning platform where we would hook into these models and just observe how these data points are converging to these labels. And we would see if there's any anomalies, and we would really go into the guts of the neural net and apply statistics to detect data noise. And what we realized is that yeah, if you supply biased data to these models, the models are just these memorization machines which will learn what you supply to it, and they'll just behave the way. So it's not the model's fault. It eventually comes down to the responsibility of the developer developing the model.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe could you just, first, in simple terms, explain what fine tuning a model means so that people understand better how Galileo supports the initial processes of for customers who are looking to train their own models? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the traditional definition of fine tuning comes from this concept of transfer learning. It's a term in machine learning typically used when what you do is you take a large model and you train that on, say, all of Wikipedia data. That's general English language data that the model's trained on. So now the model has a general understanding of how to speak English, as well as certain facts and figures that come from Wikipedia data. But you can't use this model off the shelf. say you are a healthcare drug provider who's trying to build a drug discovery application that's AI powered. You can't use a Wikipedia data powered model off the shelf. So, what you need to do is you need to supply very specific data that is akin to drug discovery to these models. And there's a very specific way you do it in transfer learning where you take your neural net, you remove the last layer, you add an empty last layer, and then do some lightweight training on much lesser data. Like you don't need Wikipedia level data, you just need a few data points around the drug discovery information. And it's amazing how these models are able to adapt, and you'll just have a model that's able to understand your drug discovery information and be able to answer accordingly. It's pretty much like magic. Fine tuning has become a pretty standard in the industry in trying to make your model more specific. In the LLM world, it's a little more expensive to fine tune these super large models. So, what people do is they either supply instructions in real time as you're querying, say, ChatGPT or Claude. You would just add certain instructions in your prompts about your healthcare data or about your industry specific data. And these models are incredible. They will be able to answer based on the extra instructions that you provide to them. So that's what fine tuning is in a nutshell.
Got it. No, thanks for that explanation. Very clear. Maybe reflecting back on your journey from Siri and Uber AI to founding Galileo, what are some of the lessons you picked up along the way that have been instrumental in your current role?
That's a very good question. It's hard to look back and not think of so many examples that have framed my journey. But if I were to cherry pick a couple of them, I think it came down to certain folks I have met who I have considered mentors and who I have looked up to on my journey and the lessons that they have taught me. One of the examples is my good friend Vineet Khosla. I take his name all the time just because of the impact that his work has had on me. And I believe he was engineer number 2 or 3 on Siri in the earliest days. This is way before Apple when Siri was incubated at a lab at Stanford. And he's kind of the OG of NLP, one of the few OGs. And one thing he's taught me, nothing related to NLP or technology, but he's taught me the value of people, and he's taught me how to build a culture where you, number one, you get the right people, the importance of having the right people in the room at the right time, and also valuing them. Just to take a couple of anecdotes from my own experience with him, in 2013 or 2014 we built the first Apple Watch. It was the first Apple Watch we had ever launched, and we worked on the AI aspect of it with Siri. And it was a very hard project because we were dealing with, it was the first time when you're doing AI on such a resource constrained device. And it took a lot of work, but we launched it. And he sent me a card which said, "Thanks for making me a good manager. I stand on shoulders of giants." And I have always used that quote with my own folks when we achieve a certain milestone. There's no way I can take credit, even as a founder or whatever. It's really, it takes a village. So valuing people, he's taught me. And one more person who I met during my Uber days, she's just spectacular. Her name is Ann Holler, and she was a PhD in compilers in the 70s, and she's been such a inspiration. She stuck to being a technologist all throughout her career, and she was very pivotal in building our AI system at Uber. And one thing she talked about was just the value of grit and perseverance. And I have really seen that play out in my own career as you grow more and more and you meet people who are often better than you, more intelligent than you, smarter than you. It's easy to get into the imposter syndrome wormhole. And what she said was essentially just the power of perseverance and just keep going. And what happens is along the way, magically, you meet people who believe in you and they lift you up and they take a chance on you, and then eventually your talents start matching up to your taste. It's magic. And that's something I've always taken. I always remember it every day. Those two people are two of my mentors. And if I were to cherry pick two life lessons that I've learned in my career, it would be those two.
That's awesome. I mean, it's great to hear from an AI leader that people are the linchpin, and that's something that you've taken forward with you in the relationships and the learnings to your time at Galileo. But could you share with us what would you say is like the most memorable memory from your Galileo journey so far?
Oh man, there's too many to count. I think right from the day zero of starting Galileo in a garage with just one person to seeing Galileo work for the first time in a customer's environment and reaching the first $1 million in revenue. There's so many such great moments which you'll never forget in your life, I think. But one of the moments which is most treasured for me is again related to the people. And it was March of 2022 when we, funny enough, organized our first Galileo hackathon. And we got everyone in San Francisco, and it was just 2 days of us hacking, and I thoroughly enjoyed just writing code again with our engineers. And not only was it a fun experience, but I was just blown away by what we built, and it was just me looking at the future and just saw the power of people when you put them in an environment which is motivating. I mean, you can do so much. I mean, that was my key realization. I still remember that moment where one of the teams, they essentially built out pretty big feature of one of our competitors, which we did not have. And it was so good. I was just blown away by how they were able to build that. And the competitor was a $1 billion company at that point. So I was like, they've just created a unicorn in 2 days. And it's just incredible, the power of the human spirit. Like if you create a no bullshit environment or a no bureaucracy or sort of an environment with less red tapeism and politics, it's incredible the amount of things that you can achieve.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was going to ask you next, what's the scrappiest thing that Galileo has ever done? But during the hackathon, creating $1 billion feature seems like a great ROI. But if there's anything, yeah, any other instance where you think that you've had to be scrappy, being a founder, I'm sure you've had instances where there was resource constraints. So any other instance where you've been scrappy?
I think the scrappiest days, of course, needless to say, go back to the earliest days because there's essentially no rules at that point. And there's many, we've been through a very interesting adventure because we started the company around COVID, and we were kind of adapting to the changes that are happening in the world while we are building this rocket. And from brainstorming in a park, being 8 feet away from each other with masks on, those were some very funny anecdotes that I literally we pinned a whiteboard to a tree. And then I was working with this postdoc from Stanford. They would be 8 feet away from me and I would be writing on a tree, and it felt very, I don't know if there's a ideal definition to scrappy, I think that would be it. And of course, even going back further, I think the first time we set up the company, it was in my garage at my home. And I was looking for a chair that's comfortable, but not too comfortable. So, somewhere between like a public bench level of comfort and a Google level of comfort. So, that was funny when we went to Home Depot and really tried to buy the optimal, kind of comfortable chair, which would not make me too. Should always remember that I'm start building something from scratch, so never be too comfortable. Those were always fun experiences of setting up the initial days of the company.
It's great that you have these such humble beginnings and the early days which you're trying to carry forward in terms of like frugality and like being scrappy, and that's awesome. Shifting gears a little bit, could you tell us a little bit more about your journey as an immigrant founder? Any challenges you faced, or any way you think that's interweaved in your culture of the company today?
I remember reading a statistic on immigration saying that I believe in Silicon Valley, about half, about 50% of the companies have at least one immigrant founder. And these are companies which are unicorn and up, so $1 billion valuation and up. And half of those are companies where the entire founding team is immigrants. So if there's ever a place which is conducive to immigrants starting companies and building real high impact businesses, it is this country and this place. I think that said, personally for me, I'm not only an immigrant founder, I come from a country where there's even further challenges around getting green cards and having decades long wait times. And I'll be dishonest if I say that that wasn't difficult. But one of my lessons was it's better to take one step forward and then not look back and then keep going. And then you lose sight of the shore. And that's kind of what happened to me, where I literally had to start the company on a visa and then have myself sponsor my own green card through my own company. So that was a very hard thing to do. But what I realized is that if you just keep taking the right steps, talking to the right people, just like Ann Holler told me, just have that grit and the determination, and eventually things fall in place. That's kind of what happened to me. Although I was a little lucky, especially from my experience at Uber, we built a lot of ML technology, which has been adopted at hundreds of companies around the globe. So we kind of got our 15 seconds of fame through that. And I spent some time at Stanford writing a couple of papers with Professor Chris Ray. So that helped. But you kind of slowly go step by step. And for me, the ducks kind of fell in order as I sort of went through the process. And my co founders were also very supportive. The lesson that I learned, I think, is that to overcome any challenges as an immigrant is the system's not perfect, but there's ways around it. And the hope is it'll get easier, but not counting on hope. I think the first thing is that you take personal agency to take steps towards it. And it's not that hard. We always imagine it to be much harder than it is in our brains. It's just that don't take the first step. So for me, it was all about taking the first step and then relying on my own skills as well as my background and getting the right folks, the right lawyers who can help you. For me, that was the story. Hopefully, things will get easier. I think with time, at least that's something I would always push for to make stories of immigrant founders, especially first generation immigrants from countries like India and China, where we typically face a lot of challenges here to start companies. It's almost unthinkable still at this point. I want to make that easier for folks. As far as the place is concerned, I don't know if there's another place better than the US or Silicon Valley where the ratio of agency to personal resource is so high that all you need is a laptop and an idea and a little bit of grit and a little bit of immunization towards failure. And then you can do incredible things here. So I hope the future is better for folks like us who come from countries where it's a little more historically been a little more challenging. But the overall future, I'm optimistic.
Yeah, your perseverance and determination is super inspirational. It's incredible to see your journey and how far you've come and you've been able to start this company. Maybe share some advice or any tips for MBA students or aspiring entrepreneurs who want to eventually start their own tech businesses.
In no particular order, I would say being ambitious and being very determined is very key to starting a business. And that includes finding, I guess, areas that you're passionate about. Because I always see business building as a long term thing. I always tell people that passion and vision, you're not born with it. You have to create it as you proceed in life. That includes reading books around how to build businesses and reading about different industries and really finding an area where you see a set of problems and you're like, oh, this is something I'm passionate about. So you kind of create that inside you. I think that's the first step. And then the other advice I always give folks who are aspiring entrepreneurs or folks who want to really create impact is focusing on the long term vision and taking up long term projects. Because a lot of people get into this with almost the intent of having a short term, shortcut exit strategy to become rich. I think that's the wrong approach because it sets you up for failure right from day zero because it's an attitude and you can't operate on a day to day building a large company or building a visionary company with that kind of a short term mentality. So, focusing on long term projects, finding areas where a piece of technology can have long term impact, like think 10 years from now. You don't have to know the specifics. No one knows how the future will hold, but there's certain assumptions that you can make. For my case, for example, I believe in ML and machine learning and AI, and I've always believed in it right from the beginning of my career. And I did not know when specific events will happen, but if I were to bet on the next 10 years on AI being able to up level industries, if I don't believe in that, then I'm not doing the right thing. I'm not in the right job. So having that long term vision. And the last one is I keep emphasizing just the determination aspect of things. I think we talk a lot about when you start a business, you have to have the right idea, it needs to be a big market, build the right product. But those are the obvious things. Those are things which are true, but obvious. What's not obvious is the level of determination you need, because in your journey of being an entrepreneur, what you'll realize is the frequency of bad stuff that happens to you is so high. All kinds of things get thrown at you on a day to day, and just building that muscle of determination. And I'm talking like outlier levels of determination to be able to get you to succeed. Like this is like 3 4 standard deviations away from a highly determined person. I think that will truly determine in the long run how successful you are as an entrepreneur.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. And hopefully, everyone who wants to start a company has those leaps and bounds of standard deviations way of determination and they can do this. But maybe what's next for Galileo? I'd love to hear what you envision for its role in transforming the landscape of AI and ML in the next few years.
I mean, I still hold to the initial hypothesis that we had when we started the company, because it's been about 3.5 years since we've been running the business, and a lot has changed. The industries have changed. We have pivoted into generative, and a lot of things have happened in the company. But one thing that's not changed is the need for better benchmarking and better evaluation of AI systems. And I still see that as sort of the one of the main key things that will become more and more important as we get into compliance, as we start getting into building a general code of conduct around these models, which are things which I firmly believe will happen. Because the other alternative is not having compliance and not having checks and guardrails, which can lead to disastrous consequences. So if I were to bet my money on this versus that, then I would obviously choose the optimistic path where we are able to build these AI systems in a more responsible way and have these kind of code of ethics and guardrails and better testing and a whole slew of things which help us build better Gen AI systems. So I still stand by that, and the need for tooling and software to be able to up level the systems that we build. And as far as Gen AI is concerned, a lot of people will have the opinion that it's all hype. And we are, frankly speaking, we are kind of going through a hype cycle where, there's quotes around language models sort of ending the world and creating robots and, all science fiction kind of things. But the truth is that I don't think that will happen. What will happen is the technology itself has proven enough worth to know that there's a lot to be leveraged from in up-leveling systems, software, services, people. And what remains to be seen is how we do it. And in general, I'm very optimistic whether Gen AI takes over or the future is kind of a hybrid system where you have language models helping in some aspects and multimodality helping in other aspects, and other kinds of MLAI models which have proven their worth in the past still existing, sort of a hybrid environment. My optimism comes from the fact that tooling like Galileo for evaluating these systems will always be a need, because there'll always be more data, there'll always be newer models trying to leverage this data, and we will always have a role to play. So I'm overall very excited about where Galileo will go in the future. The specifics of how things will turn out, I think, still remains to be seen, and I'll leave that not to adventure, and I'll sort of take it as a day at a time.
Yeah, sure. I don't think Gen AI is going to be going anywhere anytime soon. So nor is the need for evaluation and ensuring that the model is supportive and helping the future. For this next segment, for our last segment today, we're going to do a couple of rapid fire questions where you have to respond in like a sentence or so to the questions I posed. So I'm going to start with this burning question I have, which is, what would you do if you were in an alternative reality today?
Wow. I would probably wake up and think that maybe I should just continue my day and make some coffee, because that's what I did when I was in the other reality, because the other reality could have been an alternative reality, which is something I always think about. So I don't think I would do anything different than what I'm doing today, because a part of me still believes that we are in an alternative reality.
Wow, that's like some Inception meta thoughts right there. Maybe what's the craziest thing you've seen AI do today, till date?
I've been blown away by how we've taken these transformers and the underlying technology and being able to build models which create pictures that did not even exist. But one of my favorite, I guess this is news for your audience. Like, one of my favorite websites used to be, this is back in the day before generative models were this popular. The website's called This Person Does Not Exist. And it's a simple website which just shows you a picture of a person, and you refresh the page and there's a new person, but it's generated by a generative model where the person doesn't exist. And this website has existed for many years. And I was always blown away by just looking at this person in front of me. I'm like, I mean, there's some genetic combination that could have created this person, but they don't exist on Earth.
Wow, that's cool. I'll check it out after the podcast. Could you share the best book that you've read this year, or podcast, or whatever content you consume?
Yeah, absolutely. A book that I've read recently, something I found very useful, is this book called Feeling Good. And it's a book on cognitive behavioral therapy. And what I found fascinating about that book was we all have, phases of feeling depressed, and we go through our own trials and tribulations. But that book is a very, very good, like, scientifically proven book. It's not a self-help book, but it goes through very simple diagnosis of, when you feel down, when you feel low, how can you, get out of it. So it gives you the ingredients to really, like, take, the bad or the challenging moments in your life, and it gives you a framework on how you can get out of it. So that's one book I loved this year. Another more general, I guess, recommendation in books is one of my favorite books, which is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And that is a World War II book around folks who survived Nazi concentration camps, and their perspective on life. So it's super fascinating when we live in a very privileged generation to compared to, we have our trials and tribulations on earth today as well, but compared to where we were in the 40s, it's very refreshing to see how the simple things mean so much to people when you go through the worst one of the worst periods in human history.
Hmm. Thanks for sharing. And finally, what's the best career advice you've ever received?
The best career advice, I'll go back to my favorite quotes from Ann Holler, who is one of my favorite engineers who I've had the privilege to work with. It is the importance of not giving up. I think, minus the details and the specifics of what you do in your career, which industry you take, what role you take, I think all that is agnostic to just having the ability to just never give up and keep going and being optimistic and knowing that the ducks will line up in some way. You don't need to know how, but if you just keep going, then you give yourself a chance for that to happen. And I can tell you, like, it's a numbers game, life. You just got to give yourself those chances, and things do happen.
Yeah, just keep swimming, right? And
Yep.
it'll eventually reach your destination. Well, thank you so much, Atin. This has been a super inspirational podcast. All your advice and your journey. I hope that aspiring entrepreneurs listen to this and feel more determined to achieve all their dreams and goals. And good luck to Galileo. I'm sure that the company will achieve tremendous, amazing things, and excited to show you guys on. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I loved the questions. They were very deep and insightful, and they covered all aspects of, technical, non-technical. I thoroughly enjoyed the podcast. Thanks, Tanika.